Um,
Whatever.
and
The people love us. Do
yeah,
it for the culture.
it is what it is. But I do want to highlight Hoagie's comment about Bioshock because, like, if you play Bioshock Infinite and the fact that they even talk about racism in any capacity and make a wonderful, wonderful story out of what would have happened in another context with the Confederacy, your brain explodes.
It's an amazing cultural text. An
And
amazing cultural
but like no
text.
one knows. Like I've thought critically about teaching Bioshock as a class. Be like, yo, we should just play this game.
This is why I proposed that fucking class.
Yeah,
That
because
that, that, that I'm not going to reveal in case somebody fucking steals the
yeah,
idea.
yeah, no, no, no,
But I
keep
think
that
we
in
should do
wraps.
it this summer or next summer.
Um,
I
yeah,
think we should do
like
it.
there are a handful of games that do a really good job at telling these stories, but like no one knows, and then no one can appreciate them for the text that they are. Um,
Yeah.
which very neatly brings me to our last topic of the evening, which is a sore one, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It cuts me deep. Um, so for anyone who is or is not initiated in the sort of like post-hardcore alt-rock scene that we, kind of grew up in during our high school years, there is this band.
Black people like metal too.
I know.
No, no, no. I say that to the
oh,
public. Yeah, I know
just
you know that.
to let other people know that. Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a whole article that I want to get into at some point. Just that needs to be written.
Mhm.
But there's this band called I the Mighty that Reese and I are big fans of and saw perform live last summer, which was pretty cool. And earlier this summer, a fan of the band wrote a twit longer in which they detailed how after a relationship with the lead singer, um, Brent Walsh, the lead singer of I the Mighty, sexually assaulted her. And the band immediately went on indefinite hiatus in response to the allegations that were being made. And the drummer actually ended up leaving the band. He stepped away in support of the fan and the accusations that were being made and said, you know what, I'm just gonna wash my hands of this and not be part of
Well,
this.
hold on, because I think it was more principled than that. Because if I recall correctly, the post read something like, "I believe
Yes,
survivors."
it was I Believe Survivors,
Right.
and so I've
So
stepped away from I
so
the
it
Mighty.
wasn't just right, right. So it wasn't just that like, oh shit, I don't want the mud to land on me. It was
No,
like
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
taking a
No,
principled
yes,
position and walking away from the band.
yes. Let's be correct. You were right to make that clear. It was a I am in support and in line with this fan, and as a result, I am stepping away from this band.
Right,
Um,
right, right, right.
and so Brent ended up issuing a response pretty quickly, in which he claimed that he was unaware of the fans' feelings about what was going on and doesn't have a recollection of the assault in the way that it was being told, but apologized nonetheless, um, and claimed responsibility to to varying degrees.
Mhm.
Immediately, the comments on Twitter were eviscerating, right? They
Mhm.
were like, some people were like, okay, nice to see you acknowledging the thing and taking some responsibility, but pretty lukewarm, and so for that reason, I'm out. And other people were like, cancel this whole fucking band. This is bullshit. Like, you're an asshole. All the dudes in the scene are an asshole, and this is why we have problems.
Right. And to add to here, like for folks who aren't privy to the incident or don't follow either Mighty or know who they are, the guitarist who is both Brent's roommate and co-founder of the band was also implicated in not assault but just shitty misogynistic behavior.
And so it kind of left Reese and I, when we were talking through this via text, in a weird place that I think a lot of people find themselves now. Most recently, even just with Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion's WAP, right? Like this space of what happens when an artist that you enjoy makes art that other people call for the immediate cancellation of.
Mhm.
Can you separate that thing that you love from the person, right? Is there a space where that's allowed, or do you risk being canceled by everybody that exists in the void that is social media by not being like, yeah, no, we can't support this individual and the things that they've done, and so I have to just like burn my records and throw out my T-shirt and say like I'm never gonna fuck with I the Mighty ever again, right? Like
Mhm.
I honestly like have a really tough time figuring out like what to do about it because and it's probably going to sound awful to people who are like, you know, oh, you're not an advocate for sexual assault survivors if you know you're going to support the band, but like I like Where Your Mind Wants to Go is one of my favorite records of all time. Like it's like I love that record. I really do.
Yeah.
But as a sex work researcher, right? Like as someone who researches sexual harassment, sexual assault, women's agency and advocacy, right? Like for a lot of people, they'd be like, "There's no way you can still fuck with that band." So like,
Mhm.
how do we proceed? Because
Yeah.
this is not an isolated incident. People feel the same way about Cardi B and some kind of transphobic statements that she's made over time. People feel the same way about J.K. Rowling and the hill that she's picked to die on as an out transphobe, right? Like a consistent transphobe, not just like a happenstance comment here and there, right? Like all sorts of prominent. I think something even went down with like Doja Cat at one point recently, and so like I also fuck with Doja Cat a lot. Like I love her music, but like,
Mhm.
are we just supposed to like dip out and just transition to something else? Like wait for the next new artist to come along, or like what do we do?
Yeah. And I think, Marcus, part of what you're elucidating, I think the challenge here is that they're no fucking saints. Which, to be clear, this is not to create like I'm speaking of people in general. I'm not here to be a Brent Walsh apologist, but I think that this call to cancel or rally behind indefinitely artists or content producers or whatever, just human beings, individuals, um, gets in the way of the fact that life is way more complicated than victims and oppressors, right? Like, and I think that so often that's what we want. We want there to be this discrete division between the good guys and the bad guys, right? The this just split, that's discrete, that's visible, that's universally understood. Um, because I think that another piece that came out of like WAP, for example, which like before we even get into all this shit, like the song is tough, the song is dope, and some of the commentary and support, I think it is really interesting to read and to listen to. Um, but like one of the pieces that rubbed me the wrong way was like, Kylie, really? Like the OG Blackfish?
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna throw Kylie in, like, and I'm not privy to Cardi B is someone whose music sort of sits on the fringes of my playlists, and I'm not privy to her social media presence. I don't know that I follow her on anything. Um, but that was one of those pieces that I was like, I'm not a fan of. And in the case of like Brent Walsh and I the Mighty, you and I were talking about this, like, um, their last record was brilliant, and this, it was released. It's playing now, and Pet Names is playing. It was released, 3 years ago. We loved it. Um, it's a stellar alt rock, post hardcore record, and yet I remember both of us talking about Pet Names. This I mean, we called it rapey. Like there's just no way around the song, um, and and I think in a moment where allegations hadn't come forth, or at least I wasn't privy to them, um, it's maybe easier to just say, I don't know where this comes from, and you move on, or you listen to a different track or whatever it is. And it is my least favorite song in their discography. It's just gross. But then something like this comes out and it poisons the record, right? Like, and Pet Names takes on a totally different valence, in light of what's come to light. Um, and so part of it is just like, not even do I support I the Mighty, do I support Brent Walsh? It's like now, like the record as a whole, their discography as a whole becomes compromised for me as a listener. And then I ask myself, like, what is justice here, right? Like, um, what does justice look like for the young woman who comes forward? Because so often what happens in these moments, I feel like, is like Brent Walsh becomes the center of this, and the experience that she had becomes happenstance, becomes marginalia in this story. And I think people are more fixated with like, where's Brent Walsh now? What is he doing? Like, what's happened now? Are they ever going to release a record? Is the band broken up? And like, she disappears. She
Mm-hmm.
recedes into the background.
Yep.
Um, and I just like in a moment where like I think I'm a fairly decisive person, almost to a fault. I'm I'm not indecisive about how I feel about sexual assault, misogyny, gendered violence. Um, but in a moment where we claw and desire, uh, we want there to be just no ambiguity whatsoever. We want there to be, um, not no ambiguity. Shit, what am I trying to articulate? Because the thing is that the case isn't ambiguous, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
she was very clear in what she
Yeah, she was
outlined
very explicit.
happened, and Brent takes like Brent says he remembers it differently, but also takes responsibility, right? So and so the commenters who were in on IG talking about like, oh, innocent until proven guilty, everybody's like, what the fuck are you talking about, bro? Like Brent took responsibility here.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the question is not simply what is justice in a moment where she just disappears, but then is there a moment where Brent turns into the human being that never does this again? What is it like? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
What does like reintegration for Brent Walsh look like? I don't know, man. I don't have clarity. I don't even know if I'm fucking articulating the problem in a
No,
way that's meaningful.
I think you're right. And so like you think about another context. Like Dr. Disrespect, who, let me be clear, I can't fucking stand. I'm just gonna put that out there, right?
Mhm.
Banned from this very platform
Mhm.
for not allegations, for actually cheating on his spouse. Okay, comes back, is still ripping viewers left and right, like hundreds of thousands of viewers left and right. Gets banned off the platform again for no one to this day still knows. Switches over to YouTube, still garnering massive quantities of viewers. So clearly, depending on the audience, the context of who's involved, people make decisions. They are decisive about whether or not they're going to be okay with some shit going down, right? Which makes it. I think your question of what is justice is really confusing because it's like, would justice be like, no, you can't come back to this platform that gave you fame and expect us to treat you the same way? Like, should that have been justice, or is
Right.
justice being like you have an opportunity to redeem yourself as a human
Right.
being, right? And do better in some capacity. Where like I don't know if I want another I the Mighty record. Like maybe like this is it for me. Maybe I just want it to stop and be like this era is over. But I also think about like, and maybe it's also the climate, the social climate, and how more prevalent sexual harassment has become as it's being spoken up about more and more, right? And I'm thankful that we are getting to a place where that is something that people can feel comfortable talking about. We're not going to get into Title IX and all the problems that come with that shit, um, right? But the fact that like these statements can be made and things can happen as a result, and people can be held accountable, is a good thing. But I think about Johnny Craig, for example, who's done a number of reprehensible things,
Mhm.
and people still follow him, like a
Yep.
lot.
Yep.
And I'm just
Yep.
like, why? For
The man's
what
almost
reason?
untouchable. Yep.
Like
Yep.
everyone's just like, yes, we're really okay with all the things that he's done to his fan base and the exploitation and all this bullshit,
Mhm.
and we're gonna keep letting him put out whatever and
Record after
gobbling that shit
record
up.
after record after record. Yep. And and Sarah's comment here in chat, I think really matters. There's something about um taking time, learning, like demonstrable learning, but also like owning, right? Like owning whatever it is, taking ownership of your actions. I think feels so central to accountability. But we see very little of that. You know what I'm saying? We see very little of folks publicly owning their indiscretions, whatever. And I use that because we're talking about a variety of issues here. I don't mean that to be dismissive. And and I think accountability matters, right? Like accountability to me feels so central to this question of justice. But at the same time, right, like in Brent's case, he makes a donation, and I can't even remember what organization he makes a donation to, but
I think it was the one
and,
that was requested in the
right,
in the
so
tweet longer.
right, 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 and um, Sorry, I'm reading
No,
Sarah's
yeah, and
comment.
the thing about JKR is like interesting because we talked about this with Aries the other day, right? And like, Harry Potter lives outside of her. Like, we don't talk about Harry Potter and talk about her ever. It's just Harry
Mhm.
Potter as an entity in and of itself, right? Like her other books, no one gives a fuck about. Like
Mhm.
Harry Potter is a thing, a world, a universe that people are like, it is good and we like it, and
Mhm.
it has remained untainted by that, right? They're like especially because of, I think because of the movies and the
Mhm.
actors that portrayed the characters, it was allowed to exist outside of her.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I think J.K. Rowling is a great example. In that conversation, we also brought up Star Wars, right? Like we don't. In fact, people make it like a clear point that George Lucas fucked Star Wars, and that Star Wars' greatness is emerges out of like his universe building, but little else.
and
I
even
think.
like I saw a great meme about Star Wars fans that was like just varying degrees of Han Solo shrugging until it's like old sad Han Solo, like,
Yeah.
like holding Ben's face, because it's like Star Wars fans when the movies come out and they're fucking pissed, and then Star Wars fans
Yeah.
5 years later when they're just like, whatever, and then another 5 years go by and they're like, don't you dare talk about that fucking movie, I will murder you. And I bet you in another like 7 years, after all the bullshit that Rise of Skywalker got, people gonna be like, that movie is fucking amazing. Don't you ever hate on Star Wars again, or I will murder your family. Because like that is what happens.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Um, Shoot, there was something
yeah,
ase that I wanted to bring up
I think
earlier
Ace brings
that
up a good
is
point too,
totally
right? Like
escaping me
Chris
at the moment.
Brown, R. Kelly, Michael Jackson, right? There's a
Yeah.
slew of people. Even
Mhm.
even like Kevin Hart, right? Lost his hosting job because he said insensitive things. People still fuck with Kevin Hart, right? Like he got penalized and then had to figure out how to make himself likable again to both the
Mhm.
black community and greater audiences, to be like, oh, I'm not an insensitive, like queer phobic asshole. I
Mhm.
can do better.
Well, and I think it's also worth mentioning here that we're talking about celebrities, right? Like it is so easy to cancel celebrities.
Hmm.
J.K. Rowling does not know I fucking exist.
Yep.
Cardi B doesn't know I fucking exist. Like they do not give a single flying fuck about my existence at all. So my unfollow is materially insignificant to their lives, right? And it might be a principled position for me, right? As a citizen of the world, as someone who navigates social media, I might say, nah, bro, that's it. You're cut off. But for that individual, right? If we're saying that canceling people is a measure of creating accountability and justice, Kanye don't give a single flying fuck about your unfollow. Um, Kanye does not notice that you unfollowed. But I think it's this becomes so much more complex when we're talking about people we know in meat space. And I'm thinking here about all of the black at pages
Hmm.
that have emerged in independent schools, in colleges and universities. And one of the things that 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 was like a recurring call was for the firing of staff, faculty, administrators that were named in those posts.
Yeah.
Now the reality is, good, bad, or sideways, that's just not going to happen, right? Like just labor law, right?
Oh, I
Like
mean,
like
yeah, like,
schools are not going to dive into, like they're not going to face check a fucking lawsuit um, for wrongful termination. No school's going to do that.
hmm,
But let's say, right, for the sake of exercise, that schools did do that, right? That we take that problematic teacher for whatever reason and we fire homeboy. And let's be real, it's almost always a homeboy. They get booted, right? And we're talking about black at.
hmm,
We're likely talking about a white faculty member, right? Who, statistically speaking, is very likely to get hired at a different school. Um, so what's actually happened, right? That person's been booted, right? And that's what stands in as accountability. Um, but that person lands in another school district, right? So maybe they land at a homogeneously white school district or independent school or whatever university, and maybe it's Gucci over there, whatever. But if they land at another school where they're going to be teaching and having contact with students of color, with black students, we haven't changed that educator.
hmm,
We've just moved the fucking garbage. We've made that person somebody else's problem.
yeah,
And so to me, that's not justice, right? That's washing our hands. Um, and on the vector of race, right? And I know that we're bringing up Brent and Cardi B, and so there's like a confluence of issues here. This isn't merely about race, but when we close the gap, when we're talking about people we know in all of their complexities, I think that this becomes so much more complicated, and I think we invariably have to see that like it's not as simple as saying I'm 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 deleting my I the Mighty records. I'm unfollowing Brent Walsh. That when we localize these questions, it's fucking hard. It's not just hard, but it's more complicated. And firing that problematic white teacher does not in and of itself constitute racial justice. And I worry that some of those calls for the unilateral firing of faculty members, like that stands as what racial justice is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I don't know, man. Like what Brent Walsh did was disgusting. The story is fucking gut wrenching to read, and but I struggle to articulate what feels like justice in that case, like what my expectations are of Brent, and what space we then like I don't know afford him, like public space in terms of like music production. Like does Brent Walsh get to make another record?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. I don't fucking know. And
Have you listened to it since?
so I listened to Connector the other day, because I bought it. I bought it with you,
Yeah.
and I hadn't listened to it, and it just like I don't know, man. It was not the same. It just wasn't the same. Um, and maybe it's because it's a band that I have such a personal investment in that it feels really really tainting. Um, and I listened to and this was like a thought exercise. I listened to God his last solo EP. What's it called? Um,
Is it like
are you even there at all?
Yeah.
Um, and I think the songwriting is really great. I think the composition is really great. And I don't know, Herbie. And dude, that's your fucking wedding song. Like, how do you feel about it?
That was one thing. So I literally haven't listened to anything I the Mighty or Brent Walsh like since it happened because I'm a little apprehensive about how I'm gonna feel like listening to it, like because it is that personal investment, right? Like, and we've talked about I think how bands in the scene, and I know Sarah brought up Brand New earlier, right? Like we talk about bands in the scene and issues that have come up, and awkwardly we pointed out how pretty consistently most bands from that genre have put like one track on an album at some point that's like pretty sketchy, and I worry like
Honey Revenge.
yeah, what would
man.
happen if
Honey-
my favorite band of all time, Dance Gavin Dance, right? If I found out that Honey Revenge, actually made some sense because somebody from the band did something really sketchy, right? And I would look at that. I already think it's rapey. I would look at it so much worse if like I knew that the band had been on some sketchy shit, somebody in there somehow, some way, right? Like it would be really off-putting for me, and I don't know what I would do. Right? It's I don't know. It's rough to think about, and I haven't really come to terms with um what you're supposed to do with that feeling when you listen to this music, right? Like because people have their morals and their values and how they feel about things, right? Like what happens if you come from a family that's riddled with drug addiction and a whole host of issues, and you come to find out being somehow oblivious, right? That like Circa in their original form was just pumping out tracks when Anthony Green was high off his ass, right? Like could you I like even when he came clean and he was like he ranked his albums from best to worst at one point, and he dead ass was like some of my best records are the ones where I was most fucked up.
Yeah.
I look at Jaturna, which I have on wax, and I'm like, Jaturna is an incredible record.
Great record.
But
I have it on wax,
it's
too.
weird to be like he was in a dark place when he wrote that.
Mhm.
Like
Yep.
should I really be jamming to this when I know that he was just like struggling to survive and putting his family through hell?
Well, I remember I mean, this sort of takes us out of like our typical sort of musical wheelhouse. But I remember when the Chili Peppers dropped Stadium Arcadium, and there were people who were literally saying Anthony Kiedis needs to go back to fucking shooting heroin and snorting lines because his songwriting was better when he was fucked up. And I'm just like, I don't know. But then, like, and I know that we're moving into tangents here,
Yeah.
but I don't know, like there's some records that like their art emerges from like dark and sordid places, and I don't know, I get, and maybe it's because I've struggled with my own addictions that I'm, like for me, there's almost resonance with like a record that comes from a place of addiction, whereas like Honey Revenge is just fucking gross, man. It is my least favorite DGD song. Fucking Pet Names is a fucking gross song, and
Yep.
it's gross. It's more disgusting now in light of this, and I don't know, like, and it feels like, I guess there's an intimacy. Nah, fuck, I can't even say that because there's an intimacy to book writing too, right? But I don't know, like an artist's discography. I guess because a discography is always intimately tied to an artist. It's not like a the universe of a book or a film that takes on a life of its own as a fandom kind of explodes.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels so much harder to divorce a record from the artists
From
that
the
made
person,
it.
yeah. Right, and I think I think like the bigger issue that we can maybe like try to wrap up on is just like what cancel culture is doing to how we operate, right? Because one of the big things that struck me earlier this year was just businesses that took a stance on Black Lives Matter, and then like
Yeah,
that ramped up cancel culture. It was like we can't fuck with these people. We can still use these businesses and support them, right? And like I caught myself at a crossroads real quick because Starbucks came out on the wrong side of the conversation, and I was like, well, we're done. No more peppermint mochas for me. That shit, it's canceled. I have not had a Starbucks of any flavor in 6 months.
bro, they gave
Right?
us PSL. We
Canon
should have seen that shit
Canon
coming.
came out on the very wrong side of this. Canon came out and made PPE for police. And my film camera is a Canon 81, and I love that camera so much. But I'm like, am I gonna have to ditch my Canon? Because like film Twitter, which I also circle in, was like, nope. And like dead ass, a lot of really prominent photographers yeeted their Canons and swapped over to Fuji and Sony, and like they were like, no, we're not doing this. We're gonna spend that money and move on because we're not about to throw stuff away. I know, like I don't want to ditch mine either. Um, like, I can't afford a F2 or F3, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. But like, and that's the thing because people expect you to just be like you don't separate them. They're all bad. Like the makers are bad. The thing itself is bad, right? I'm talking about an inanimate object. I'm talking about coffee beans and a camera. But I don't know if one day I'm out shooting a couple flicks and somebody sees me, right? And I could be wearing my Black Lives Matter pin when it comes in from Bungie, right? I could be squatted up visually, and somebody could be like, "Oh, you support Canon? You racist son of a bitch." I'd be like, "Absolutely false. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I just happen to own this piece of machinery that is not a poster child for who I am and where I stand."
Right. Well, and I think, Herbie, like it also gets back to this piece about like utility. I
Thanks,
think that
Ryan. I
it's
appreciate
fucking.
that.
I think it gets back to this fucking question. Like we are not gonna, like you can't buy equity, right? And what I mean by that is like we're not gonna purchase our way out of misogyny and homophobia and racism, right? Like the notion that like if I consume the right products, I'm somehow like guiltless. It's just so fucking bullshit. Um, and I think it's cheap. To me, it's like the fucking black squares on Blackout Tuesday, and then the fucking loud silence from so many people
Mm-hmm.
thereafter. I also think that like when we paint like products in particular as just black and white, we then also like fail to consider subversion and like how we can repossess and retool things, right? Like we forget that enslaved Africans like strategically fucking fucked with master shit to like carve out and strive for freedom. I will never forget. We had at Dickinson, fuck Dickinson. Nah, I don't know. I have a mixed relationship. I can't say quite fuck Dickinson, but where my head's at. And ODI, the Office of Diversity Initiatives, did like some chat about like queer issues and LGBTQ issues. And you know what we ordered?
Mm.
Chick-fil-A.
Ah, yes.
And we got Chick-fil-A to donate all the fucking sandwiches. That's subversive to me. It's fucking hilarious.
Yeah.
Because good or bad, we know them shits is objectively delicious.
Yeah.
But the women of ODI were like, wouldn't it be funny if, and it was profoundly hilarious. Does that change Chick-fil-A's politics? No. But for a moment, we got Chick-fil-A to get by, at least the Chick-fil-A nearest Carlisle, Pennsylvania, abided by, what we wanted to do. I think those moments matter. But, standing behind like, this like consumerist, like I will purchase my way into the like woke Illuminati, to me is morally, ethically bankrupt.
Yeah, I think Sarah hit the nail on the head, right? Like, what you're supporting with your cash, and like whether or not you're going to be held responsible for money you already spent, even like before shit went down, right? Like, I got these records on my shelf for 3 years, and all of a sudden now they're corrupt.
Yeah,
you can't predict that shit. There's no way for you to know,
first
right? Like, we grew up inundated, literally buried under a mountain of Goya products, and look at where we're at right now. That shit is taboo. We're out here making our own sazon because.
And the reality is, you're not gonna convince no fucking abuela to buy some other shit, bro.
No, God no. But it's just like, oh, so we just gotta return all the arroz guandula that we've been eating for the last 30 years? Like, really? Just give it all back because that money was poorly spent?
Mm-hmm. The questions are limitless, man. My kid's asleep right next to me.
I believe, yeah. I mean, it's time to wrap it up.
We're an hour over our.
Let's not talk about
it. We've had like pretty consistently 11 concurrent viewers. To those folks who bothered to fuck with us tonight, even after the long hours, thank you. I don't know about you, Mothman. I've had a fucking good time, and the chat has been lit in no small part.
I loved it. I appreciate everybody who came through, everybody who watched. I hope that this becomes a regular thing, and that you come back, you tell your friends, tell their friends, whatever, if they want to come listen to two grumpy academics wax gamer about a bunch of different topics. We're more than happy to host. I'm glad that it even went this long, to be totally honest. I know that it's a long episode, but like the fact that
we knew we had shit to say.
We can talk about this kind of stuff and be this way is the way I wanted it to be. I want to thank you for getting this project off the ground with me.
We've been talking about it for a minute.
It's going to be dope. We will condense this as best we can, put it on the YouTube. We'll clip some highlights and put them on the gram and on Twitter. Blast us on our socials. Reese at _crosslace. Myself at Mothman XII on everything. Any last thoughts?
I called it on my story. I called it cocktail hour. I think we can make that a recurring thing.
I mean, I will always probably be drinking during this. That's just going to be a fact. When I first started grad school, I wanted to keep
prior to the recording.
I wanted to keep booze in my desk for these exact kinds of conversations, but I was told that was taboo.
You know what? Maybe this is the perfect sign out. This is one of my favorite stories from graduate school. A colleague in my cohort who will go unnamed, but if anybody knows my cohort, you know exactly who it is. We were touring in March, the incoming cohort, and this kid, he was incoming first year, sees a bottle of Doors. And you know how you and I feel about Doors. And he's like, wow, so y'all just be drinking down here? And this cohort mate of mine goes, well, we host office hours, we'll sometimes study, and we certainly don't snitch down here either.
Damn.
And he just buttoned it up, and we kept it pushing. And that was, I think, the most thug thing I've ever seen in the academy ever in my life. I think about that frequently, and I hope that I can be that emphatic and direct in all my endeavors.
And that is what it is.
It is what it is.
This has been the Office Hours podcast. It's Reese. I'm Marcus, and I've been wanting to use this as a sign off, so I'm gonna do it now. Remember, children,
shit.
just because it's in water doesn't mean it floats. Peace.